We have a working group called Click, Clean the Grid, and as our major activity, we have been participating actively in the Fix the Grid campaign. The
Mhm.
Fix the Grid campaign is an attempt to have reform the activities of ISO New England. And I will explain all of that to you as we go through this process. Um, that's okay. And I just wanted to remind you that we are in a situation where the uh, amount of carbon in the atmosphere is way higher than it's been for more than at least a million years.
Mm.
And it's up at the level of it's over 400, almost to 420 now. And I was curious about this recently, and I looked it up. And the last time there was this much carbon in the atmosphere, uh, this was the kind of animal that lived on the planet. The last time there was 420 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere was the mid-Pliocene area.
Hmm.
And the most alarming things about that is that the sea level was 78 feet above where it is now. And that that means that if, this is just a small thing, but, people talk about, well, what will it be like in, 2070 and stuff like that. The thing is that if we keep this much carbon in the air, it's going to get warmer and warmer, and all the both of the poles are going to melt, and then it's going to be a lot worse than, oh, well, there's a foot here, no, it's a foot here. It's going to be much
Right.
different. So we have the capacity to take care of all New England's electric needs by using offshore wind. As you can see from this picture, the things now that they use are enormous. Look at that ship, which
Wow.
would be,
Yeah.
great in your dock, but looks like a little puny thing compared to those windmills. And what we need to do is we need to have electrified heat in people's homes, and we need to have a electrified power in our cars, and we need to have a lot of electricity from power plants that will handle all of that electricity and also all the gadgets that we have. And that involves using an electrical system that was uh, reorganized in the 1990s. And uh, what happened is that Congress, this was during the period of time when deregulation was really popular. And what happened is that they set up a deregulated system where there were regional energy um, organizations, and they were called independent system operators. And you can see that on this map that these independent system operators cover about two-thirds of the country. The
Hmm.
other ones, the other states have just their own state power systems. But
Hmm.
over there in the right-hand corner, you can see the blue of New England. And so the blue of New England is a place where we have ISO New England. And ISO New England is the company that regulates uh, all of the electrical power generation in the region. And part of what deregulation was is that it involved uh, taking the utilities and saying either you are a power plant company or you are a transmission and distribution company, and you can't be both. So, for example, uh, natural grid, na no, not natural grid, Encore, EverSource. Sorry, forget these things. EverSource, for example, only does transmission work, and other companies that we don't usually know the name of only do the generation work. And what ISO does is it regulates the generation of electricity, and the two utility companies, National Grid and Eversource, have split up the transmission and distribution of that energy um, in the New England. Now, ISO is designed to do three things. One is that it sets the rate for electricity, how much it's going to cost for the coming year. Each year they do have a rate setting process. Another is that it manages from minute to minute the amount of electricity in this whole, all the wires around New England, so that it balances out. And the third thing it does is it has a process that it uses to a bid process where people say, and they say, we want a certain amount of electricity 3 years from now. And they then say, well, so what we need new power plants to do that, and we want you to bid. And then people come in and say, we can build a new power plant and provide a certain amount of energy for a certain amount of money. And in that bid process, ISO then decides who gets to be the providers of electricity. Now, doesn't make a huge difference if if it's 2010 and all of the energy facilities are using natural gas to generate electricity. You're just umpiring between the various companies. But if you're in a situation where you're trying to transition from natural gas to solar power and wind, then it becomes a lot more complicated, because then you get into a situation where there are losers and winners on a big scale. Because every time you add solar power or wind power to the grid, somebody who had a natural gas plant loses out and loses business. And
Mhm.
so ISO has been, for the last 10 years or so, um, only gradually adding solar and wind power at a scale less than the amount of new electricity that gets needed every year. And so there's a small amount of wind power and solar power in the transmission system, but no plants have been closed because of that, because it always makes sure that it has fewer uh, it has less wind power and solar power than it does
Hmm.
natural gas generation. So that means that, for example, in 2020, 52% of the electricity in the New England grid came from natural gas powered facilities. And then 27% came from nuclear power plants. 8% came from hydropower that they got from various places, mostly outside of New England. And 4% was wind power, and 3% was solar power.
Hmm.
So this is a system that is not transitioning to non-fossil fuels very quickly. And I just wanted to highlight that because, the Paris Agreement occurred in 2016, and the ISO New England has not been taking those signals and saying, well, we need to be doing redistributive stuff. And so fossil fuels are still doing a lot of um, the uh, the work, I
Hmm.
would call it, in providing power. Now, one of the ways it does that is that its governing organization is called NEPOOL, and in it um, there are. It's really interesting. Remember, I wrote this book about the Roman Republic, and so I know this. The voting system that is used to run ISO New England is the same as was used in the proletarian assembly in the Roman Republic. And it's very it's
So,
very strange. I was reading this and then I was read, I've seen this kind of political organization before, and I was in the Roman Republic, and it's done for the same reason. It changes the balance of power in a way that is very odd. So you could
Hmm.
see that there are actually only 6 votes when decisions come up, and the 15 million residential users of electricity in New England have 1 vote because they're in the end users group. And there's a 41 there because there are 41 official members, and those are all organizations. The 12 companies that generate uh, natural gas powered electricity also have 1 vote.
Hmm.
So there's 15 million here, and there's uh, 12 here, and so they each have an equal vote.
Hmm.
And then the utilities have another whole vote. And these are people who supply supplies and electricity and other things to these groups, and they have another vote. So it's 3 to 1. The people who are, standard operating companies, very small number of humans, have 3 votes, and the end users still have 1 vote.
Hmm.
And the publicly owned entities are multiple, are power systems owned by municipalities, and they tend to vote along with these things because the people who in small communities who get on the board of their public utilities are usually people who've had some experience in the industry already. And so they're inclined to be part of the industry as it was when they were employed there.
Hmm.
And there's an alternative resources one, and they vote in different ways depending on what they think is important for them. So you could see that it's actually, there's kind of a 4 to 2 um, permanent
Hmm.
voting majority here
Hmm.
in their way NEPOOL works. So that means that all of the engineers and lawyers and accountants and all those folks who work for ISO and who are specialists in this kind of stuff are primarily oriented towards running the fossil fuel system well. And they're not oriented towards saying, how do we um, how do we try to make the system uh, work with solar and wind power coming in? And so you can see that the output of ISO is uh, not so great.
Hmm.
Um, Now, the part of the thing that's going on is that ISO New England is uh, doesn't account for the human costs of climate change when it's looking at the cost benefits of having natural gas power versus solar and wind power. So we know now that there are human costs because one, there are disasters, and two, there's pollution. And there's an enormous amount of pollution. The United Nations calculated that 9 million people a year die prematurely in this world because they live near an area where it's heavily polluted. And 9 million people spread across the globe maybe doesn't sound like too much to you, but 300,000 of them live in the United States.
Hmm.
So every year, 1/3 of a million people in the United States die from pollution because we have fossil fuels.
Hmm.
So there's a human cost to having fossil fuels. There's another cost, which is that they have things called peaker plants. Um, and I can explain in the question period, if people don't know what a peaker plant is, I can go into it more deeply.
Mhm.
The basic thing is that a peaker plant is a facility that would have been closed because it's old and inefficient, and instead they keep it around and they pay them a bunch of money to keep the facility up and running. And on very cold days or on very hot days in the summer, when you have a peak use of electricity that goes over the standard amount that the system normally has, they they call up the people who run a plant like like the Mystic plant, and they say, fire up this plant and give us electricity for the next 6 hours. And we need electricity because there's a peak going on. And some of you have heard of things like cut the peak.
Mhm.
This is what they're talking about, is that peaking of energy usage. So these peaker plants, unfortunately, are usually located in low income communities around the state. There are no peaker plants in Swampscott or Wellesley. There are peaker plants in Chelmsford, in Chelsea, and Quincy, and Peabody, and other communities like that. But there aren't any in wealthy communities. And the other thing is that these are very, very dirty old plants. And so even though they're only open for a short period of time, they're very dirty. So the peaker plant thing is a very nasty little issue. So what then does Fix the Grid Coalition want to do? These are the 7 things that we would like to have ISO do. And you can read them there as I talk. And what, let me tell you something about like what these things might mean. Ensure no communities are burdened with fossil fuel energy infrastructure. That's number 3. And what that would mean would be doing something like having a rule that says that no plants can be built in communities that already have fossil fuel energy infrastructure. That the companies that build anything new would have to put those facilities in other communities. So that the burden of dealing with having electrical energy facilities, grid wires, all that kind of stuff, is spread around to communities everywhere and not concentrated just in communities that are populated by minorities or people with low incomes. So that's the kind of stuff. Encourage small scale energy production and storage. And what that means is having small amounts of energy be able to bid to be in the process so that you could have a neighborhood with of a town that had, or a whole town, collect its solar energy from the rooftops and sell that to the grid, so that the sources of production in the energy system, there were many more, and that would make the system more resilient in terms of energy uses going up and down. Now, we would like you to think about getting involved in fixing the grid. And let me tell you a little bit about what we've done recently, which would give you a sense of what getting involved would mean. Last fall, we had a rally in Holyoke, which is where ISO New England has its office. And we had a rally, we had music, we had speeches, and then we marched down to where their office was, and we had a speak out. People talking about how problems with the grid were affecting their lives. And after ISO came out and said that they were going to continue using the rules that block new solar and wind power into the system, we had a rally to protest that. And as part of the rally, we got a bunch of letters sent to our senators. And Senator Warren and Senator Markey and Senator Sanders wrote a letter to the federal government saying that they want ISO to not be staying with natural gas, and instead wanting them to change their rules so that solar and wind power comes in more. We also did an event last week where we helped people submit comments directly to the federal government so that they could affect the regulatory process that goes with this. So we have articles that I write about ISO at 350 Mass's website, and we have our own, we just put this together, our own Fix the Grid at WordPress. So these are our 2 ways for people to hook in. So if you're interested in following what we're doing and hearing about activities that we're doing and seeing how you might be able to participate in that, please write down one of these websites and consider going and checking it out.
Thank you.
So that's my show for you. I can stop the share, and would be glad to answer questions that people have. I know that it's a pretty complicated topic, and um, I know that it's not easy to absorb all of that at once, but I'd be happy to go into it in more detail. Any place where I just didn't went too fast and left people behind.
Yeah, a question, Linda, for Monty.
Uh-huh.
You said that ICO controls, regulates the cost of electricity. And I always thought that the private company themselves, like Eversource, do their own cost of electricity, and they increase it every year. How does it work together?
What happens is that the electricity that is generated in the grid by ISO gets sold to the utilities. And the utilities tack on a fee for their being the people who transmit that electrical energy around. So the amount of money that you pay in your electric bill is the cost of generating the energy that ISO sets, plus the cost of transmitting the energy that the utility set. So both the utilities and ISO are creating the price that you pay. And I think if you look at your bill, you can see how it's divided up into different categories that don't make any sense. And I think that that's their way of telling you that some of this was the cost of generating electricity and some of this is the cost of transmitting the energy.
But who regulates the regulators in the first place?
Well, ISO sets the price by balancing out the bid prices that market participants, the power generating plants, submit to them during the yearly bidding process. And the utilities set the price based on what the Department of Public Utilities in each state allows them to charge. Let's see. It might be easier to understand if you thought about it as a gallon of water. So 3 companies tell ISO that I can give you a gallon of water for $1. Well, one says I can give you a gallon for $1.10, and 2 other ones say I can give it to you for $1. So ISO says, well, we're not going to have $1.10. We're going to have $1 because we have 2 companies that can give it to us for $1. So they go to the utilities and they say, this costs you $1. And the utility then says to the Department of Public Utilities, we need 10 cents to deliver this water, each of these gallons of water, to our customers. And so when you get the water, each time you get a gallon of water, you pay $1.10 to the utility. And 10 cents of that goes to the utility, and $1 of it goes back to the company that dug up that water.
In other words, the public regulators still depends on the appetite of the private company.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Well, it's a free market economy. That was what
That's
Congress
what
was
it is.
creating.
Okay.
And what
So-
Congress said is that if these companies are competing with one another, they will come to a fair price. I mean, if you think about it, that's what the idea is behind every product that you buy is a product of various companies competing with prices.
Except they're
And
not competing. They're doing the price gouging.
yes, well, that is the fly in the ointment, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So New England actually pays some of the highest electric rates in the country because the competition is very limited.
Hmm. So,
Yeah.
Monty, I have a question about, so this group called Any Pool is the group that votes on, what gets done
What the rules are.
is that in Massachusetts or is that across all 6 states?
It's across all 6 states.
Okay, and could you then say a little bit about what the role of the Massachusetts DPU is in the utilities? Because don't they have some oversight with the Department of Public Utilities, some oversight or some responsibilities?
In some ways, they do, yes. The ISO and the New England Energy Region was created by Congress and the president in 1996, I think it was. And so it is a federal organization. And that means it cannot be regulated by the state government. Okay, so the DPU doesn't have any control over ISO. The DPU only has control over the utilities, National Grid and Eversource. And National Grid and Eversource go to hearings at the Department of Public Utilities, and the Department of Public Utilities says you will get this much money for transmitting electricity. And the Department of Public Utilities will take into factors of what is the cost that they have to put the wires up and repair them when they get knocked down by a windstorm and stuff like that. So the Department of Public Utilities regulates how much the utilities make, but ISO regulates how much these power companies make, and they are only regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC.
Mhm.
So that's why we had the senators and our folks submit comments to FERC,
Right.
because FERC, as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for the whole country, is the only place that has the ability to tell ISO, you have to stop this policy and you have to let solar and wind power come into the system.
Could you say a little bit about the makeup of the FERC board? That's a very small group, I understand.
Yes, FERC has 5 commissioners, and the way it works is that the president, let's see, how does it work? Whoever has the president, whichever party has the presidency, has 3 members on the board, and whoever is in opposition has 2 members. So while Trump was president, there were 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And so during that period of time while Trump was president, FERC encouraged ISOs all across the country to not allow solar or wind energy in, because Trump was against, and Trump and the Republican Party are against solar and wind power pretty much. And now that Biden is president, we now have 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans on the commission. And so now there's a change of tune, and the Democrats on the FERC are encouraging more solar and wind power. And so we have a feeling that they might be. So the FERC agency kind of slightly oversees all of the ISOs, and they're really the only people who have the ability to say, oh, well, you can't do that, or yes, you ought to do that. It's really taken, that kind of decision-making power is sort of taken away from the local regional level.
Wow. Is that what we call democracy?
Well, yeah, you know what? It's democracy and capitalism together. Mr. Burns, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. So since we're democratically rules now, so we can have the green energy come in. So what would happen over time after we have increased the percentage of green energy production in the US? Can the Republicans reverse some of that activity?
Well, what the Republicans could do is that, for example, if a Republican was elected president in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, they would then be able to put a person on FERC, and they would have a 3-2 majority, and they could encourage the ISOs to begin closing the door again on solar and wind power. And so it's not really a matter of they would command that you had to tear down all of your windmills. It would mostly be a question of when would you replace the natural gas plants.
Okay.
So it's not
Monty,
really,
I have a question. Who are the two Republicans on the commission?
mean their names.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't have their names.
Oh, I mean, they're not politicians.
No, they're not
Oh,
politicians.
okay. I misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah, no, the people who are on the commissions are usually people who have been in the industry for a long time,
I
because
see.
the presentation I've made to you is a way for us normal people to understand how the system works. You can imagine how large amounts of electricity is generated and transferred around the country. It's very complicated. And it's very easy to fall into a whole bunch of jargon that none of us would understand. But the people who get appointed to that commission are usually people who have a lot of experience being in the industry. They're usually lawyers or former managers of power plants or people like that.
Okay.
Monty,
And that's really no politician would be able to follow what was going on in their meetings.
Right.
Monty,
David?
question for you. Can you tell us more about nodes and working groups and climate courage? I just looked at the 350 site and wondered what sort of experience you have with that and what words of wisdom you might offer.
Well, 350 is, unlike most other organizations, we don't have chapters, we have nodes. So node is just a name for a chapter. It's a little more modern kind of word. So so a node is just a group of people who live either in one community or in a region. Like you could have a Plymouth node that consisted of Plymouth and whatever town is to the north of Plymouth. And you could have 2 towns in it. And then all the people in that node would be in that. So those people would meet once a month and do things on a local level. And Climate Courage is what's called a working group, and it consists of people from all over the state. And they have, like you guys do, have always had Zoom meetings. And they do demonstrations. And they've been primarily working on the campaign to get Chase Bank to divest from fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
our working groups usually have more specific environmental issues that they're working on. So that's what Climate Courage does. And that's a volunteer group, and it's people who show up on the Zoom meetings once a month or 2.
Okay.
So the
I've
Zoom
been
meeting is
reading-
where you find out about
I'm
what's
sorry.
The Zoom meetings is
David?
where you would find out about what was going on.
Okay. You know, I know that we all know this and it's been in the paper, but my husband and I have personally experienced this. We live in Norwell, so we have National Grid, and we joined a solar farm last August. And we're on the farm, we've been given a space on the farm, but we're still not able to get any credit from it because National Grid still hasn't signed off on the papers. So there's all this obstruction going on all the time. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know if I was eating dinner in the beginning, so I don't know if you addressed that already, but it's very frustrating. And I'm certainly open, to any suggestions. I keep calling National Grid and they keep passing the buck, so.
Well, let me put it this way, is that you've had a Republican state government in terms of the administrative part of the state government for 8 years now. And
Yes.
so the Department of Public Utilities isn't very aggressive about the way regulates companies. And
Mhm.
so it hasn't formulated regulations for a national grid that say, you know, you will, within a certain period of time, you will take these applications and you will, you know, you will get things going. And
Mhm.
so what happens is that the Department of Public Utilities basically allows the utilities to drag their feet and prevent, you know, resist having home solar situations. It, the way you can perceive it is that it's a lot easier to be a utility if you have a big flow of electricity coming from uh, ISO New England, and you don't have all those little pieces of electricity coming in from all these rooftop solar places. That makes it more complicated balancing out where your electricity is going to go. And so
Mhm.
having a whole bunch of rooftops with people putting solar energy back into the system, it makes it harder to run the system.
Mhm.
And so they don't want to do that.
Right.
They're just not
So,
interested in the transition and decarbonization and stuff like that. They don't really care about things like that.
but Monty, don't all those rooftop systems reduce the need for peaker plants? I mean, maybe we view that as a goodness, but maybe they don't view it as something that's good.
Well, the utilities don't use peaker plants. The utilities
Okay,
go through ISO.
I see.
ISO likes to have peaker plants, and it doesn't want. ISO doesn't want to deal with all of these little solar plant things. So ISO doesn't care about that. They just want peaker plants. That's a lot easier to deal with. They have, you know, 10 peaker plants in Massachusetts, and they turn them on and off, and they don't have to worry about small amounts of electricity coming into the system. It's a very
So,
it's, you know, the incentives in the system are not set up to incentivize these companies to change to decarbonize, to
Mhm.
have
I mean,
solar and wind power come in. And oh, and the reason for that, I mean, the big economic reason for that is that the companies with the expertise to do wind farms out in the Sound are different than the companies that do natural gas.
Mhm.
So if you switch and have solar electricity, or you have wind electricity, then you say, we don't use you anymore. Natural gas folks, you can just close your plant down and stop. And so they are attempting to preserve their business for as long as they can. And what our regulators are doing, and what you know, the slow walking the change to solar and wind is like trying to preserve the buggy industry
mhm,
after people started manufacturing cars.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
said, oh, we have to have the federal government subsidize buggies, or we had to have a road set up so that cars couldn't drive on them and only buggies could, or things like that, that's the analogy, is that people are trying to keep the natural gas companies in business when in fact we should be just switching over to the superior new technology that's going on.
Of
And it
course.
didn't happen with buggies, I don't think, but that's what we're
well,
doing now with natural gas.
Mhm.
so how do we change that? Because that's in diametric opposition to where the state goals are and where most of our goals are to, reduce our dependence on these fossil fuels.
Right. Fix the grid strategy is to first is to publicize ISO and the role of ISO. As you can imagine, most people don't know anything at all about ISO, never heard of ISO, and are just uh, completely in the dark as about where their electricity comes from. And what we've done over the last couple of years is that we've had events, and we send letters to politicians, and we put articles in newspapers, and that kind of stuff, trying to make it a public issue. And then we're asking our governors to put pressure on ISO by threatening to leave the ISO system if they don't get their act together. The one thing that we can do is we can say Massachusetts is unhappy with the ISO system and we're pulling out. And
Huh.
in fact, Connecticut is unhappy and Rhode Island is unhappy. So the three states are going to put together their own energy regulation system and ISO, see you later. And that's what some of the other states out in the American West have done. And so it's something that our governor could do. Now, that's a really big deal and, big change. And we don't expect to win a victory like that anytime soon. But if governors start putting pressure on ISO, then we can get them to change their rules. And then they can start operating better. So that's the goal for us, is to, one, make it a public issue, and two, have the governors lean on ISO and threaten to leave.
Right.
Because
And we're going to have to get really much better at making sure that we elect a Democratic governor.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, Massachusetts doesn't have, we switch back and forth from Republican and Democrat. And so there are long periods where there hasn't been a whole lot of pressure on ISO to change. But that's kind of what needs to happen now in order to get this environmental thing to happen, because they are so tied into keeping things the same so that everybody needs to keep making their profits, that they really haven't changed anything for a while. And we're having some effect.
So can the
Yes.
legislature pass any laws that would pressure them, or is that just simply totally parallel universe to their rules?
No, in the federal system, you can't. A state legislature cannot pass a law that orders a federal agency to act in some way.
Okay. So, wow.
Meanwhile, mandatory solar bills are coming. There are two of them are now sitting in Massachusetts State House.
Mm-hmm.
And state of California already passed it 3 years ago. Mandatory solar on all new construction. How does it affect the ISO?
Well, what happens is that if you have the state government mandating wind and solar power, and what they're mandating is they're telling the electric utilities that they have to take the electricity and purchase it from the solar power and the wind power people and cut that out of the electricity that ISO is delivering. And so electric utilities would basically have two sources of electricity. It would have the ISO sources and it would have these other sources from the legislature. So that does put pressure on ISO, because you could eventually be in a situation where the utilities have more than enough electricity coming in from outside, and then they wouldn't buy as much from ISO, and so the natural gas companies would not get their business. It takes a long time to do it that way, and eventually, the thing is that eventually that's going to happen. They're going to push the utilities to have certain amounts of electricity, and there'll be a. But the thing is that for environmentalists is that that might be happening by 2050. But we all know that waiting till 2050 to reach our climate goals is a little late. And the planet will be a mess by 2050. And so we'd like to see things happen faster. So we'd like to see ISO go faster, rather than just be pushed by this slow process of the legislature allowing more wind power and utilities changing and then ISO changing. We'd like to see the transition happen much faster. But it would happen that way eventually.
Dick,
I've
is
got
that
a-
a question?
I've got a question, Monty. On a day like today, there must be a lot of rooftop solar systems that are producing more electricity than the house underneath them is using.
Yes.
So that must pour off into the grid.
No.
Right? What is it?
No.
What happens to it?
You're not allowed to put into the, well, you're not allowed to put into the grid more than you use over the course of a year. Um, the electricity, it just, I'm not sure exactly, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what they do with it. But the rule is that you can only, when you have a household electrical system, you are only allowed to contribute to the grid over the course of a year the amount of electricity that your house uses.
But it's so
Yeah.
seasonal. I mean, right now, everybody is producing a lot more than they use, and in December, they're producing a lot less than they use. So over the course of a year, it might even out, but.
Yeah. If it doesn't even out, then you're given something called an SREX, which is a payment back.
Right.
But that electricity isn't going into the system
Hmm.
because it messes up their calculations of how much electricity is in their system.
And it seems to me that I watched one ISO New England meeting, and it seems to me one of the things they said was that ISO New England invites proposals for the various power producers to tell them how much energy they want to produce in, say, 3 years from now, in that year,
Yes.
and what they would charge for it.
Yes.
Right. And
That's right.
ISO New England then selects which ones they're going to use,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yes. Well, what they do is they choose the ones that bid lower.
Yeah, okay.
And what they do is that the process they use is that they penalize solar and wind power bidders, because solar and wind power bidders have been helped by state government. They've gotten tax credits or various things that have been done, to stimulate putting in more solar and wind power. And ISO then says, well, you've been getting assistance from the state government, and that's not fair to the other people competing in the grid. And so we're going to say that the state assistance you've been giving is worth so much, and we're going to tack that onto your bid. And they tack it onto your bid, and suddenly your bid, which used to be lower than the price of natural gas, actually is now higher than the price of natural gas, and so you don't get into the system.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the way it
really.
works. It's very amazing. It's really amazing, but it's a rule that they have from another situation, and they misuse it basically.
Wow.
Because what they say is that their job is not to have solar and wind power come into the system. Their job is just to have an efficient balancing of the market, and so they can't give anybody allow anybody to have an unfair advantage.
And yet they're serving the market. So there is a contradiction there.
Well, it's not. The deal is it's not really a free market. It's a market that's overseen by somebody who sets the rules for how the market runs.
But it is not free.
It's a regulated
ISO
market.
Yes.
It's a regulated market, Anatole. We have these all over the place.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
regulated market. It's not a free market.
Sure, just like your
Right.
water that comes into your house.
It's-
That's not a free market either.
There are very
Yeah.
few free. There are very few truly free markets.
Mhm.
The only free markets I can think of are like if you drive along a highway and one guy has a field and you can go and pick up strawberries for $1 a box, and another guy, it's $1.25 a box. That's a free market.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But most other markets are regulated in one way or another by a governmental unit.
that's what I'm saying. That's,
So-
yeah.
So you don't have a free market outcome in any way.
It was never free. It was that
Yeah.
market was never free in America.
So I'm going to interrupt in the interest of time and see that it's almost 8 o'clock. And I think this has been an enormously productive and illuminating discussion, at least from my point of view. So thank you. Thank you so much, Monty. I have a couple of items for the climate levy I'd like to go over before we close our meeting. But at this point, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on and explaining this. And I think that we have to shine a light on it so that people have an understanding of it, because it just seems crazy when the state wants to go in one direction and the utilities are not helping out. You know, as Ellen said, she's been trying to get connected for a long time and hasn't gotten anywhere. So
There's
anyway.
a lot of stuff. There's a lot of inertia in the system that, and you know, I mean, it takes a lot of citizen activity. You know, Fix the Grid is mostly just a group of volunteers like me.
Yeah.
You know, and volunteers like you guys. You know, what you're doing is absolutely essential for things to get better.
Yeah.
You know, we're all going to be looking around the room. Most of us are going to be gone, in 2050. But you know, our kids and our grandkids and people
Yeah.
like that are going to be here, and we don't want to
Right.
leave them with the dump. So you know, everything we can do is going to be helpful.
Yes.
So thank you very much for inviting
Yes.
me, and check out those websites.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you
This has
so
been
much.
great.
It's
Sure.
Thank you.
wonderful. Yeah, take care. Wow. So sometimes it's just, when you understand it, it's hard to even well, I guess somebody said it is on purpose that it's so complicated. They don't really necessarily
Yeah.
want it to be visible.
That's right. The
Well, I
bureaucrats
don't think they have any
help
choice.
The utilities or
The regulators.
What do you mean by
because the
that?
rules are
Yeah.
written in a way that perpetuates the existing system. Is that what you
Who
mean?
Well,
Ooh.
the rule, the basic rule is that we get 110 volt AC at 60 hertz constant, all 24 hours a day, 365 and a quarter days a year. And trying to bring a bunch of sources in to keep that balance is not an easy job.
What do you think of green hydrogen filling that gap?
Which gap?
The fact that wind and solar aren't 24/7, and but it looks to me like that's the hope, that green hydrogen will keep it constant.
Well, by green hydrogen, you mean hydrogen that's produced using energy from either solar cells or wind turbines?
Right.
Yes.
Or even biogas, they're calling it,
Yeah, I'm skeptical about that.
which I'm skeptical about too, but I guess.
Well, hydrogen is a very tricky thing to handle. You know, it's a very low viscosity. It leaks from joints and pipes a lot faster than natural gas does. So it's tough stuff to handle, and I don't see that being people talk about using the natural gas distribution system, which has tons of leaks in it now, and with hydrogen, it would be even worse.
Oh, isn't that what was in the Hindenburg? That's the only thing I can think of when they talk
yeah.
about
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
green
it-
hydrogen,
Yeah.
not sure I want something so explosive coming into my house.
Well,
Methane
what do you
is
think
bad
natural gas
enough.
is?
No,
Well,
it wouldn't do that.
Methane
It's that
is
it would
bad
be
enough.
like China is putting everything. They've been using coal to create hydrogen for years. And now, they said that now they're going to turn to green hydrogen. And that the reason being that all of the big energy consumers, like the tractor trailers, the factories, the things that we don't really know how we're going to deal with, the hydrogen could do it. And so whether, if they turn, I don't know what they're going to do, turn them into fuel cells. I have no idea what the technology is. But when I see a country like that they are number one in every single renewable energy. So it makes me think like, well, what are they seeing? What are they doing? Why are they saying they're gonna do this?
Yeah, well,
Mhm.
anyway, hydrogen is not the answer, and it's just another servant of the big companies and the political machinations. What they, I think we have to limit our efforts to wind and solar, for God's sake. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
The-
I think that looking at other sources that can be green is certainly good from a research standpoint, but I'm not